Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Ravi Korisettar, Senior Fellow of Dr. V.S. Wakankar Archaeological Research Institute in Bhopal. Today we are going to discuss on Western and Central Indian Chalcolithic cultures in the subject of Indian culture under the paper Pre and Protohistoric Cultures of India. Let us have an idea of the objectives of this particular model. We are going to discuss various aspects of early agricultural societies which emerged in different parts of Western and Central India, distributed between western part of India including Rajasthan and major part of Madhya Pradesh, including some areas of northern Gujarat as well. Here we will be discussing some of the Chalcolithic cultures that came up during the 3rd millennium BC and which have been designated Ahar Banas culture, Kaita culture, Malwa culture, and so on and so forth. The main purpose of this presentation is to help you understand how these Chalcolithic cultures evolved while adapting to a particular type of environmental conditions in northwestern India as well as in central India. These cultures flourished in the region outside the Greater Indus Valley. As we all know, Greater Indus Valley refers to that particular region which includes northwestern India as well as the whole of modern Pakistan. In this region, we have seen the rise of first urbanization in India and have a clear picture of antecedents of agricultural way of life as well as clear picture of the manner in which agricultural way of life gradually developed from simple Neolithic way of life to Chalcolithic way of life to a very complex urban phase that had a widespread occurrence covering more than 500,000 square kilometers of area in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. But outside this particular region, we have evidence of simple agricultural societies spread over several of northwestern Indian states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, and central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, particularly the western part of Madhya Pradesh, which is popularly known as Malwa. This region gets the name Malwa because of the language spoken by majority of the population in this region, which is called Malvi. The Chalcolithic cultures that have been identified in this area have been designated as Ahar Banas culture on the basis of distinctive type of pottery that has been identified at one of the early excavated sites of Ahar, and Banas culture is also another name for the Ahar culture because the site of Ahar is situated on the banks of a small river called Banas. Further southeast of this particular region, we have western Madhya Pradesh, which is known as Malwa, where we have series of sites along the Chambal and Narmada river valley. Before we try to understand the distinctive characteristics and the life phase of Ahar Banas culture and Malwa culture, let us have a brief background of what was happening during the 3rd millennium BCE. As I mentioned earlier, further westwards of this particular region, we have had a clear picture of the developments during the 3rd millennium BC, where that particular region gave rise to what is called the first urbanization in India, which is also popularly known as Harappan civilization. However, in the region which is under consideration, archaeologists who have been working there during the last 5 to 6 decades have documented fresh evidence of simple agro-pastoral societies which were well adapted to arid to semi-arid conditions during the time period from 3000 BCE to 1400 BCE. As a result of such surveys and systematic investigations, we have now a clear picture of geographical distribution of a variety of Chalcolithic cultures characterized by distinctive pottery types. Now we have identified Ahar Banas culture, we have identified Vindhyan Chalcolithic, we have identified Ganga Valley Chalcolithic, we have identified Southern Neolithic and Malwa and Jorwe culture in the northern Deccan region. Along these early agro-pastoral societies, we have also been able to identify the presence of simple hunter-gatherer societies coexisting with these sedentary communities in these regions. The focus of Indian archaeologists was higher in these regions for the simple reason that when India was partitioned, well-known Harappan civilization sites such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro became part of Pakistan. So as a result of this particular situation, Indian archaeologists were keen on identifying similar sites on the Indian side. This led to surveys in the region of the Greater Indus Valley as well, and including the regions of Madhya Pradesh, where there were also efforts by archaeologists to look at the region from the perspective of identifying Aryan settlements. This led to accident discovery of variety of sites distributed in all these areas, showing distinctive pottery types scattered on the surface of mounds, large and small, located on the banks of major and minor rivers including Narmada, Chambal, and rivers like Banas, and so on and so forth. Trial excavations carried out at these sites gave rise to a distinctive Chalcolithic culture, and the evidence for antecedents of this particular Chalcolithic culture was not documented from these trial excavations. As a result, this region came to be identified with those Chalcolithic cultures which flourished in the regions which I briefly mentioned previously. Now, these Chalcolithic cultures could be placed between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age in northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, whereas in the region eastwards of the Greater Indus Valley, these cultures could only be placed between the Neolithic and the Iron Age of the later time period. Now, let us understand the term Chalcolithic. The Chalcolithic period refers to the intermediate time of culture and technological change between the Neolithic and the Iron Age, and which was dominated by various agro-pastoral groups. So the emphasis here is understanding an intermediate phase where we have no evidence of systematic development of a laid out settlement, as well as the existence of well-defined craft specialists and traders and such other communities as we have seen in the Harappan civilization. Here, the settlements have revealed the dominance of agro-pastoral way of life. In addition to that, the Chalcolithic phase was heralded by the discovery, introduction, and widespread use of various metals such as copper, tin, bronze, along with the continuation of stone tool technology. What we try to explain here is that the Chalcolithic phase is associated with the settlements which were located close to the resource areas, because these were the first people who made use of the metal copper, tin, as well as bronze. The use of these metals also indicates that it was not only the discovery of the occurrence of some of these basic materials like copper and tin, but also development of metallurgy which could give rise to a hybrid metal known as bronze. Now, this bronze was very popular among Harappan civilizations, but here in this particular case what we see is the Chalcolithic people primarily depended on natural presence of copper as well as presence of copper in the form of ore. So, to extract copper from the ore, metallurgy was an important invention that was made by these communities. Now, the presence of copper metal or a combination of copper and tin and such materials like bronze, what we see is there is a essential continuation of stone tool technology which was developed much earlier by the hunter-gatherer communities. That is the presence of microlith tools which were very essential in various economic activities. We also see some regional variation. and it is referred to as Bronze Age areas, a period where agriculture and animal plant domestication increased multifold since the Neolithic and also represent the roots of subsequent urbanization. On this slide, we have a couple of points which need to be remembered by all of you. Some of the most prominent non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures were spread across Gujarat, Rajasthan, Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh and included Prabhas, Rangpur, Aharbanas, Kaitha, Malwa, Jorwe and Savalda cultures. We have to note one particular thing is that the names that I mentioned about, such as Prabhas, Banas, Kaitha and so on and so forth, is based on identifying distinctive pottery associated with these sites, and the names of these sites that I have mentioned here also refer to the type sites, because that evidence which has been found at these sites is also found in sites in relation to this particular site across a geographical area. Other regions were homes of cultures that produced such entities as ochre colored pottery and copper hoards in the Indo-Ganga region and Upper Ganga and Yamuna Doab. In some regions of South Asia, such as Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and Burma, the Neolithic Chalcolithic phase is absent or is yet to be properly identified. Almost all the Chalcolithic cultures are associated with deposits of black cotton soil, but geographically distinguished based on differing pottery weights and other minor attributes. In this particular case, it is necessary to also note that the entire subcontinent has not given rise to uniform distribution of a variety of Chalcolithic cultures. Some areas are as yet blank in terms of either the sites are not being discovered or these regions did not attract some of these early agro-pastoral communities into these regions. In addition to basic agriculture, many of these Chalcolithic populations also participated in hunting, fishing and craft production at comparatively smaller scales. What we mean here is, in comparison with the Harappan lifeways and the dominant urban way of life in the greater Indus Valley, all that we see in these Chalcolithic cultures in the post-Harappan period is on a much smaller scale. Like the Harappan sites, many of these Chalcolithic sites are fortified, and evidence from Gilun, Balatal and Inamgaon indicates the beginning of chiefdoms. So this means that even the Chalcolithic period, there existed a political economy, and this political economy is also reflected in the nature of evidence coming in the form of surplus as well as existence of craft specialization in these particular context. This module focuses primarily on the Aharbanas, Kaitha and Malwa cultures of northwestern and central India. All three cultures have differing chronologies and were short-lived in comparison to the Harappans. Kaitha culture lasted from 2000 to 1800 BCE. Aharbanas culture lasted from 3700 to 1830 BCE. Malwa culture in this particular region flourished from 1700 to 1500 BCE. The Kaitha and Malwa cultures are distributed in the Malwa region of western Madhya Pradesh, while western Maharashtra preserves the clear evidence of Malwa and Jorwe cultures. Against this background, we would also like to look at the people who were responsible for the discovery, excavation and generation of knowledge regarding the Chalcolithic cultures that flourished in different parts of the Indian subcontinent in the post-Harappan time period. The major achievements of archaeologists who have worked at these sites are noteworthy. We call some of them as pioneers and some of them as the people who have contributed to a scientific reconstruction of the Chalcolithic cultures either in central India or in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. Amongst the illustrious archaeologists that we know today, the name of Professor H.D. Sankalia, V.S. Wakankar and Professor M.K. Dhavalikar stand apart. The major excavations that have given rise to the basic understanding of these cultures were carried out by Sankalia in Madhya Pradesh, V.N. Mishra in Rajasthan, Dhavalikar in Madhya Pradesh in the company of the late V.S. Wakankar. What we all should remember is knowledge of history or prehistory without proper knowledge of geography is like hanging a picture without frame on the wall. That's one reason why we always would like to make sure that the readers and the students have clear picture of the spatial distribution of various culture areas. We have identified Ahar Banas culture, we have identified OCP culture or ochre colored pottery culture, we have identified Malwa culture, we have also identified Southern Neolithic culture. So we should also have a clear picture of their spatial occurrence and to be able to understand the relationship between the geographical areas as well as the relation between the cultural communities which were distributed in terms of the culture areas we have identified. So this particular map aims at giving you a clear picture of the regional distribution of all these culture areas associated with distinctive pottery types identified by typical sites such as Ahar on Banas River, then Navdatoli on the Narmada River, and several sites in the Ganga Valley associated with ochre colored pottery, and the typical greyware, buffware culture associated with the Southern Neolithic, and so on and so forth. Now let us focus attention to that particular region where we have widespread distribution of settlements associated with Ahar Banas culture. Ahar Banas culture sites are largely distributed in the region of southeastern Rajasthan, which is also known as Mewar. Malwa culture sites are distributed in the region of Malwa, which constitutes the western part of present-day Madhya Pradesh. The map also shows dense distribution of sites associated with Ahar Banas culture along the banks of rivers of various order. Over 40 sites of the Kaitha culture have been reported from the Malwa region in Madhya Pradesh, which is adjacent to the Mewar region of Rajasthan. Many sites are located in association with drainage system of the Chambal river. Unfortunately, only 2 of these Kaitha sites have been excavated, the type site of Kaitha and Dangwada. Both these sites have yielded all 3 regional Chalcolithic cultural horizons identified as Kaitha, Ahar Banas and Malwa. Kaitha is a very popular site that has been known even in history. Its original name was Kapittaka, the place where a very famous astronomer Varahi Mihira was born. This site was excavated by V.S. Wakankar of Vikram University in Ujjain. What it means is Kaitha culture identified by a distinctive pottery was the earliest Chalcolithic phase at this particular site. This was succeeded by Ahar Banas culture, and Ahar Banas culture was also later succeeded by Malwa culture. The focus of Malwa culture lies along the Narmada river. Now when I mentioned about the distinctiveness of the pottery of the Kaitha culture, the most common pottery representing the Kaitha culture is the chocolate slipped ware, which is sturdy, well baked, and includes convex-sided jars and carinated dishes, similar to those of the tanware of the Ahar Banas culture. Some of the vessels were decorated with linear designs with black pigment. Other wares of the Kaitha culture include buffware with paintings in red and combed ware in which the decoration is represented by groups of incised wavy lines. A handmade grey ware is also known, and its main shapes are handis, basins and storage jars. Like other Chalcolithic cultures, the Kaitha people used both copper and stone tools. This map is equally important because we have different legions to represent distinctive culture areas and also distinctive culture types. This map gives a closer view of the culture areas distributed in Western India, that is in particular Saurashtra, and Northwestern India including Rajasthan, and Central India where we have Malwa region and the Northern Deccan sites. Prabhas culture is also post-Harappan culture. It's a distinctive Chalcolithic culture distributed in Saurashtra along the coast of Saurashtra and little inland. The sites like Rangpur and Prabhas are type sites in this area. When we move towards Rajasthan, southeast Rajasthan or Mewar, we have sites like Ahar and Gilund. And then it has widespread distribution in the southeastern direction, where they gradually merge with the Malwa region. Now in Malwa region, we have sites like Dangwada and Kaita, which were excavated early, and they were the ones which gave evidence for a distinctive Kaita ware, which we described just now. And further south of the Narmada, we enter into Tapi Valley, Godavari Valley and Upper Krishna region. This is the region, this is much larger in area in comparison with those three areas we just now discussed. Now this region includes a series of sites that are typical of that particular region, where we have evidence for the development of Chalcolithic cultures from the Malwa to early Jorwe to late Jorwe during the time period from about 1800 BCE to 700 BCE. Now this map gives you an idea of distribution of Malwa culture and the important sites that have been excavated. As we can understand, there is an overlap of geographical areas when it comes to understanding the distribution of Malwa culture. Malwa culture is widespread not only in central India but also in northern India. The evidence for Malwa culture comes from Chandoli, Daimabad, Naivasa, Inamgaon, Bahal, Prakash, Navada-Toli, Nagda, Eran, and so on and so forth. In terms of the number of sites, the Malwa culture is much more widespread than the Kaita culture, with over 100 sites reported from various river valleys such as Narmada, Betwa, Chambal and their associated tributaries. Again, very few sites of this culture have been excavated: Nagda, Kaita, Navada-Toli and Eran. People of the Malwa culture cultivated cereals, legumes, oil seeds and fruits, and cereals included bread wheat and rice. Among the pulses and legumes were lentil, black gram, green gram, kesari dal, and the presence of oil seed was also documented through linseed, and fruit is represented by bear. What is important here is we have knowledge of their agriculture, variety of crops that they cultivated because of archaeobotanical investigations that were carried out at the sites which were excavated. This was an important development in the history of archaeological research as well as a major landmark in our understanding of the agricultural economy of the people who practiced an agro-pastoral way of life. Now here it also became necessary for us to understand which one of the crops that were cultivated by these people were native to this area, which one of the crops that were cultivated by these people were introduced from other areas. And that has helped in understanding the manner in which early trade networks were established by simple agro-pastoral communities. The people of the Malwa culture domesticated and exploited domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, goat and pig. They also hunted, caught and consumed wild animals such as barasinga, rat, fish, turtle and mollusks. Similar to the idea that we have about various types of crops that were cultivated by these people, we have clear evidence of continuity of domestication of animals as well as hunting of animals. There were distinctive type of animals which were domesticated. This particular domesticated suite of animals were basically already well domesticated in Neolithic context, in the case of Harappan and pre-Harappan context and so on. So there is a continuity of domestication of cattle, sheep, goat and such animals even in the Chalcolithic period outside the Greater Indus Valley. In addition to that, we also have clear picture of animal bones coming from these excavated levels where we have wild animals as well. The presence of bones of wild animals gives us an idea of the animals that were hunted. Gilund site is an extensive mound rising to a height of about 7 meters from the floodplains and at least 15 meters from the bed of the river. This map gives us an idea of Ahar Banas culture sites along the river Banas, including Ahar, Gilund and Balatal. In order of importance, while Ahar gave us the first definite idea of the existence of a post-Harappan culture in that region, Balatal excavations were multidisciplinary investigations which have given us a clear picture of a well-developed Ahar culture settlement and also the successive stages of development through excavation at Balatal in Rajasthan, Udaipur district of Rajasthan. The Ahar Banas culture is best known for its distribution of nearly 115 sites across the Mewar region of southeastern Rajasthan. And these sites are not only located on the major river, that is Banas, but also along its tributaries in the districts of Banswara, Udaipur, Chittorgarh, Bhilwara, Baundi and Ajmer. The undulating region is rocky and interspersed with deposits of fertile soil and vegetated zones, and this culture was contemporaneous with Harappan civilization. Most of our knowledge of this culture comes from only 3 excavated sites: the type site at Ahar in Udaipur and the nearby sites of Balatal, Gilund and Oziana. Site catchment analysis at Balatal has also identified smaller satellite sites which supported the larger sites in terms of resource acquisition. Gilund is the largest known site of this culture and which also preserves evidence of the Iron Age. Here there is a particular mention of site catchment analysis. This is an important method to understand the settlement pattern of these Chalcolithic cultures. We have been emphasizing the fact that most of the sites are located in large and small rivers, but their location in respect to natural geographical factors, including the resources in the area, is important to understand why the sites are situated where they are. And this particular approach is also called settlement pattern studies. Now, catchment analysis is one approach that helps us clearly describe the relationship between landscape features, resources and the settlement itself. Now, as we move eastwards of southeast Rajasthan into Malwa region, we are now focusing our attention on the Narmada river and some of the tributaries like Chambal and related rivers. Here again we see widespread distribution of settlements standing prominently on the landscape and giving rise to surface evidence of a variety of pottery. Amongst them, a new variety of pottery which was not previously found in southeast Rajasthan was also identified. The sites which have now been called Malwa culture sites were identified in the 1950s by Sankalia's excavation at Naudatoli, Aeran, Nagda and so on and so forth. Now this map gives us a clear picture of their distribution as well as their association with what is known as black cotton soil. Now, the prosperity that we see in the Chalcolithic culture of Malwa culture is largely associated with the relationship with the black cotton soil. This slide gives us a clear idea of the nature and extent of the Chalcolithic site of Balatal in Udaipur district. We have also an extensive map of the excavated area wherein it has now been possible to identify a variety of structures related to one another at Balatal. Balatal has been extensively excavated for multiple seasons from 1994 to 2000. In terms of a high resolution chronological framework, Balatal is an exception among Chalcolithic sites with 30 radiocarbon dates bracketing the Ahar Banas culture between 3700 and 1830 BCE. The upper part of the stratigraphy preserves evidence of an early historic occupation which followed the Ahar Banas culture after the site was abandoned for a short period of time. The houses comprised single to multi-room and varied in shape including rectangular, squarish and circular. They were mainly made of stone, mud brick and mud. The larger structures, massive foundations of stone and mud brick more than a meter in width. Above this were constructed walls of mud for further reinforcement. Many of the homes also contained both above ground and underground bins for storing grains. Some of the excavated kitchen areas preserved U-shaped ovens, stone saddle quens and rubber stones for grinding cereals and pulses. Both Balatal and Gilund have yielded pit silos for grain storage and which were lined with grass and lime. Some of the distinctive pottery types that have been found have been reconstructed in terms of their shape as well as the decoration that we can see on the outer surface of the pots. True to the name Chalcolithic, we also have clear picture of the variety of copper objects, particularly tools and implements that were made by these craftsmen at some of the central Indian Chalcolithic sites. Similarly, we also have the depiction of closer view of the designs on the outer surface of the pottery. Few more examples of varieties of pottery found from excavations at these sites. So in the Chalcolithic context, we also have to have adequate evidence of agricultural economy. Here we have clear investigations that were carried out both on animal remains as well as plant remains, which were preserved in the various strata that were excavated at some of these well-known sites. For economy and subsistence, the people of the Ahar Banas culture mostly relied on cultivation, animal husbandry and regional hunting practices. They cultivated wheat, barley, lentil, common pea, finger millet, Italian millet, panicum millet and so on. Paleobotanical investigations at Ogiana yielded remains of barley, dwarf wheat, bread wheat, rice, varieties of millet, horse gram, lentils, peas, moth bean, chickpea, sesame seeds and sunflower. Now this has also given emphasis to identify the crops which were introduced into this area. Wheat and barley were certainly introduced into this area from the northwest. And some of the pulses that were cultivated were introduced from South India. And some local millets were also cultivated. Domesticated animals included cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat and pig. This is a common package of animals that we come across at most of the agricultural settlements ranging in time from the Neolithic to Bronze Age and so on, even in the Iron Age. So the package of animals does not vary from one region to another region because these animals were well adapted to spatial variation in the climatic and environmental conditions. The evidence of domestication and consumption of these various animals comes from the large quantities of bones and teeth recovered during excavations, many of which were burnt or charred. And that evidence is a clear indication of processing the animal before it was consumed. Here again a picture revealing the various types of structures associated with Chalcolithic way of life. There are so many pits which are identified as pit silos for storage of grains and so on. The most important aspect of craftsmanship that we see associated with ceramics is also terracotta. Now, although we get a variety of animal bones representing which have helped us in identifying domestication of cattle and so on, in addition to cattle bones, we also have terracotta figurines of cattle bones, particularly the bull. Bull representation is very common. So there is no doubt about the fact that cattle was not only domesticated, but also they were symbols of worship in some context. They have some ritual significance in the context of fertility cult that prevailed among early agricultural societies. The defining ceramic of the Malwa culture was the Malwa ware, with a buff or cream slip and painted patterns in dark brown or black pigment. The main vessel shapes were the lota, storage jars and bowls and dishes. Channel spouted bowls and pedestal goblets from Navdatoli are particularly interesting and share some characteristic shade with the select ceramic assemblages from Iran. The painted designs were mostly geometric in nature, although naturalistic designs of animals, birds, dancing human figures and plants were also made. In addition to black and red ware ceramics were painted in white and buff ware ceramics were painted in red. So there is an additional support to reconstructing domestication practices amongst these people and also inferring long distance connections based on a close study of designs on the pottery, shapes of the pottery, particularly the carinated shape as well as pottery with spout and so on. The study of Chalcolithic sites in the subcontinent is important to reveal the extent and nature of cultural interaction. trade networks, transitions within complex societies, and the symbolic and religious adaptations during this critical time period in human history. Future research should focus on excavating and dating more Chalcolithic sites to see how they first emerged, thrived, and subsequently transformed into other regional cultures. Because so very few sites have been excavated, we have very little knowledge of the environmental adaptations, cultural interactions, and trade networks, for example. In addition, many of the available radiocarbon dates from previous excavations require calibration as well as renewed dating agendas. In summary, what I would like to emphasize here is that although we have excavated series of sites across a wide geographical area, although we have identified distinctive Chalcolithic cultures, we still do not have a clear absolute chronology for the development of Chalcolithic way of life in these geographical areas. It is now imperative that we lay emphasis on understanding the environmental adaptations of these communities. Although the package of animals as well as package of crops that were cultivated give us an idea of adaptation to semi-arid environments, we still have to go into more detailed studies and also put emphasis on understanding the nature of trade, the nature of craft specialization associated with the production of variety of materials that we have documented from excavations, and also we should have a clear picture of the manner in which the transformations from one cultural stage to another cultural stage occurred in these regions during the 3rd and 2nd millennium BCE. Thank you, and I would like to suggest that in together with e-text, if this quadrant can be studied, it will enhance your understanding of the Chalcolithic cultures of northwestern and central India.